Hello and welcome to class number 12 of this quick revision series of Prelims 2024. I hope all of you are doing good. We have had 11 classes so far. We have discussed topics from art and culture, Indian polity and Indian economy. Last class was the last class for Indian economy. From today, we will be starting our discussion with environment. Every single year in the prelims exam, you see a lot of questions from environment, lot of reports that are in the news, a lot of different species that are in the news, wildlife, national parks, sanctuaries, all of these we will be covering in the next few classes. If you want to get the PDF of these lectures, join the Telegram group. I have given the link in the description of the video, become a part of it and you will be able to download all the PDF. Also, the entire playlist for this series is in the description of the video. Go ahead and check that out in case you have missed out on any video. Let's begin with the very first topic. The first topic for environment is India recently released its own heat index. So the idea is around the world we have many heat indices that talk about what are the conditions of severe heat wave, where the temperatures have become extremely hot, etc. India thought that it is not really in line with how Indian weather patterns work. So India got its own heat index so that we can identify whether it is a heat wave or not. The difference mainly is that we will not just look into temperature. Mainly most of the indices look into temperature only. But for India, our heat index will look into temperature along with the impact of humidity. Humidity also, as you know, plays a major role in determining whether or not you feel comfortable enough in a particular place at a particular time or not. Many times when you check temperature on your smartphone will say something like current temperature, let's assume 23 degrees Celsius, and then it says something like feels like 35 degrees Celsius. Means the temperature is 23, but it is so uncomfortable because of humidity, you will feel it's like 35 degrees Celsius. So what is happening here is there is an impact of humidity also at play. This is what we have introduced in our own heat index. It will also understand us, or it will also rather help us understand impact of humidity and the high temperature, how it adds to the discomfort in human beings. It has been launched on an experimental basis for now by the IMD, provides guidelines for different regions so that when you are going out of your place, traveling, etc., you can look at those guidelines and decide whether you actually want to go or not. High heat index values will indicate that there is a risk of heat related stress and health issues, so you will obviously be advised to stay indoors. What is the categorization of heat levels on this particular index? So there are different categories and they are color coded. Green means less than 35 degrees Celsius. Yellow would mean 36 to 45 degrees Celsius. Orange would mean 46 to 55 degrees Celsius. While red, the most dangerous, would mean over 55 degrees Celsius. So that is the categorization of these heat levels in India's new heat index. This is how it will be done. Again, same temperature, but you might feel very different. For example, in Delhi, 35 degree will be very different as compared to 35 degree in some place in Kerala because of the humidity factor present there. Next, the government of India launched an app called the Meri Life app. As you would know, the Prime Minister a few months back gave a clarion call for Mission Life. What is Mission Life? The idea is simple, that in order to fight against problems such as climate change, we are all focusing on industries, taking big steps, spending a lot of money, all that is fine. But as per the Prime Minister, as per this mission, even small changes in our lifestyle on a day-to-day basis can have a major impact on our environment, on our sustainable living. So the idea is not just for the industries, not just for the companies, the organizations to take steps in order to have a sustainable climate. We should ask the individuals also to take some steps on their own. This is the idea of Mission Life. Now the government has gone one step ahead. They have launched this app also. What does it do? When you enroll on this app, it will give you certain tasks that you should do this. For example, you should walk this much rather than taking a bike or a car. you should go through a public transport, you should walk this much, plant these many trees, etc. So it will give you a push to do the right thing, to make some changes in your lifestyle. That is the entire idea of the Life app. So it will basically ensure that citizens themselves also play an important role in this entire global movement where we are fighting against the problem of climate change. It will encourage you to participate in tasks under 5 different themes. First, save energy. Second, save water. Third, reduce single-use plastic. Fourth, adopt sustainable food systems. And fifth, adopt healthy lifestyle. These 5 are the themes under which you will be given certain tasks under this particular app. You will be given these challenges and you will be given a date by which you would have to fulfill these challenges. Again, don't expect a prize in return. This is just a government initiative to make people more aware of these kind of issues. As I said, the idea of this Life mission was first given by our Prime Minister at COP26 at Glasgow. Since then, the Life mission is or has been a part of government statements. Whenever the government has any negotiations, whenever we talk about climate change, sustainable living, we usually keep on speaking about Mission Life as such, and this app is one step ahead to make sure that people also play an important role here. Also, this particular mission talks about nurturing individuals, which will be called P3, Pro Planet People. So it is about making people aware who will be in their day-to-day activities, be on the lookout, not to harm the planet, to take actions which are sustainable in nature. The mission is to replace single-use and dispose economy and make sure that people focus on renewable resources, people focus on things that can be renewed and that don't have to be thrown away just after one single use. Next important news, India has decided to join International Climate Action in Civil Aviation from 2027. What exactly is this? The idea is civil aviation, that is the airplanes that fly where you go from one city to other city, one country to other country. Those airplanes also harm the environment considerably because of their emissions. There has been a lot of talk to curtail those emissions from civil aviation, but there was no binding agreement as such until recently. Now the countries around the world are working towards this problem of how to control and curtail emissions from civil aviation. In this aspect, some initiatives have been launched. India was not a part of it earlier, but now India has decided to become a part of it, but only starting from 2027. So what exactly is this? This is called the CORSIA plan, where CORSIA stands for Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. This particular scheme is running in 3 different phases. First is the pilot phase, 21 to 23. Then the first phase, 24 to 26. And then the second phase. Out of these 3, first 2 are voluntary. Please understand. 3 phases. First one is the pilot. Then there is the first phase, there is the second phase. These 2 are voluntary. India is not joining these. India will only join from this mandatory phase, starting from 2027. This is when all the member countries who have decided to accept this plan, this is when all the countries will abide by this, and India has decided to participate starting from 2027 only, not before that. Now there are 2 of these agreements, basically CORSIA and LTAG. What exactly are these? Let's see. Now both of these are being run by International Civil Aviation Organization. The International Civil Aviation Organization has made certain goals. They have tried to ensure that there is a 2% annual fuel efficiency improvement through 2050. So every year till 2050 they are trying to improve fuel efficiency by 2% so that lesser fuel can be consumed. This can be done by partnering with organizations that produce these planes like Boeing, Airbus, etc. They also want to focus on carbon neutral growth and achieving net zero by 2050. These are some of the objectives that ICAO has been trying to achieve. How are they trying to achieve it? By 2 different initiatives. First is CORSIA. This is what India has joined now, will be joining after 2027. So the idea is to address the CO2 emissions from international aviations. How will it be done? So there are two things that can be done. Number one, the airlines can reduce their emissions. How? By improving their efficiency, by maybe adopting best practices, improving technology. But understand, when you say net zero has to be achieved by 2050, you can't have a situation where civil aviation has zero emission. Civil aviation will not have zero emission. There will always be some emissions. There will not be planes who do not emit anything. So how do you reach net zero? This is where the concept of carbon offsetting comes in. Carbon offsetting means the airlines say that okay, we know we are emitting CO2, but what we will do is, if we are emitting, let's say, 100 tons of CO2, then we will plant as many trees that will be able to neutralize 100 tons of CO2. This is called carbon offsetting. Meaning that I know I am polluting the environment, I can't stop that, but I will try and create a mechanism which will be opposite to it so that it neutralizes that situation. That is called carbon offsetting. So they will ensure carbon offsetting, reduction in emissions, implementation of better technology, etc. Remember, CORSIA is only for those flights which are from one country to another. So it's about international flights. It is not applicable on domestic flights. So if you're flying from Mumbai to Delhi, it's not covered under that. It's mainly for international flights. That is where ACIO comes into the picture. Second one is LTAG. This was adopted recently. This idea of this initiative was to ensure net zero carbon emission by 2050 in support of the Paris Agreement. It basically does not push every country to achieve this. It understands that countries have different levels of development. Some countries have the technology to achieve this, some countries don't have the technology. So depending upon the nation's capability, their level of development, they will be pushed towards achieving their own respective goals. Next important news about environment was the meeting of Global Environment Facility, the GEF, in Brazil, where eventually something new came up or something helpful came up. Over $500 million was set aside for work to be spent on biodiversity. Now, as you know, one of the biggest problems around the world in fight against climate change, fight for preservation of biodiversity is the lack of funds. Global Environment Facility is an arrangement that talks about contribution from nations around the world and multinational organizations to collect that money and to spend on conservation of biodiversity. So in this meeting at Brazil, they decided that $1.4 billion will be spent to tackle climate diversity and pollution crisis. This was the 8th meeting of the Global Environment Facility. Do remember that. Now, this particular meeting was important because, again, allocation of funds is not very usual. Global Environment Facility is responsible for arranging money for a lot of important initiatives. Most of this money will go into Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. This is the new framework fund that has been established. It's a new fund. About 50% of the resources will go to this particular fund. 20% of the money will be spent on indigenous people and local communities. 3% money will be spent on least developed countries. 36% will be spent on small island and developing countries. Now, if you're asking a question, do you have to remember all this data? I would not say it's necessary. I would not advise you to remember all this data about who is getting how much percentage. That is not really important. What's important for you is to remember a bit about GEF, that is Global Environment Facility. The fact that it came up in 1992 at Rio, and it basically is a collection or an umbrella of multiple funds that are trying to fight against a problem of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. Where do they spend money? This is where they spend money. So there are, remember this is important. There are these 5 international conventions which are mainly funded by this facility. So Global Environment Facility collects, arranges funds for these 5. First, the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Second, Stockholm Convention on the POPs. Third, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Fourth, UN Convention to Combat Desertification. And fifth, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. So remember, these 5 are funded by the Global Environment Facility. It's a collection of funds that tries to collect funds, donations from nations and multinational organizations so that these initiatives get enough money for their implementation. This is a timeline of how these assemblies have taken place, how money has been arranged, how money has been allocated from time to time. Another important thing that happened from environment point of view was the global stock take. What exactly is this? In 2015, we had this famous Paris Climate Agreement. In 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, the countries agreed to take certain actions so that the global temperature of the earth does not go beyond 2 degrees Celsius. So all of them decided that we will work on some goals. All of them made their own goals. These are called nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Countries set up their own goals, own targets and said that okay, we will work towards this. The idea was not to allow the earth to become warmer than 2 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial revolution era. Now, it has been a long time. 2015 was a long time back. So it was thought that let us now see where do we stand. If a country promises I will do this, I will do that, let us assess whether those countries have fulfilled their promises or not. This is called global stock take. Stock take means assessing the progress made by the different nations on their own promises. The promises that they made, are we still on track to achieve the target of below 2 degrees Celsius or are we not on track for that? The first stock take basically started in last November, basically November 2022, and it completed in 2023. It's a 2-year process, it's a long time because you have to take under consideration what are different countries doing, take data from there. It will happen every 5 years. Now, the report that came out was not very positive. Most of the countries were not on track. India, surprisingly or happily, was one of the only countries that was still on track to achieve its target. Another important environment related news was a phrase that became famous called the Blue Ocean Event. What do you mean by the Blue Ocean Event? Scientists came out with a finding that at the present rate, in summers, Arctic Ocean could be free of ice by 2030s, which is a big concern. The Arctic Ocean not having any ice in the summers, it's a very, very disastrous situation because that means the ice has melted. That means the level of the sea will increase. This situation will be called the Blue Ocean Event. So Blue Ocean Event means a situation where the Arctic Ocean becomes free of ice, and the scientists think that considering the rate of increasing temperatures around the world, we should expect this to happen by 2030s. This was a study published in Nature Communications. It said that Arctic could be ice free by 2030s. There will be dangerous consequences for that. But is it too late? The scientists would have to decide that. Why is it that the Arctic is moving towards ice-free summers by 2030? It has been heating very quickly. There has also been focus on the sea ice, which is a critical indicator which tells you how fast it is melting. Sea ice is diminishing in the last 40 years. Multi-year sea ice which remained at the end of the summer has reduced drastically. So in summers, when the temperatures increase in the Arctic, every single year the amount of ice, the thickness of ice has been reducing. This situation of an ice-free Arctic will be called the Blue Ocean Event. Do remember that. Now, it's not to say that the scientists are making a prediction. What they do is there is a very complex modeling that happens based on the rate at which the temperatures are increasing, based on the rate at which the ice or thickness of the ice is decreasing. And that is how it is predicted by when can we have a situation where we do not have any ice in the Arctic, and that is how this particular prediction is done. Sticking to climate change, one other study or report that came out related to biodiversity was 2 out of 5 amphibians may be threatened with extinction because of climate change. These kind of reports are important not because of the exact numbers, but some of the facts in these reports can be asked. Now, what exactly are amphibians? Amphibians are those organisms that are multicellular vertebrates. They live on both land and water. Frogs, for example, are the major examples or the most common example. They're cold-blooded animals. They respire through their lungs as well as their skin. These amphibians are at great grave danger due to climate change. What does this report say? The report says that in the coming years, 2 out of every 5 amphibian may face extinction. 40% or over 40% species of amphibian globally are threatened, which is the highest percentage as compared to others. Now, these are the kind of facts which are important for prelims. Please understand, UPSC will not ask you about exact percentage. UPSC will just ask you that as per a recent study, amphibians are at the greatest risk of extinction as compared to mammals, reptiles and birds. True or false? That will be true. So rather than focusing on remembering the exact fact or exact number, from the prelims point of view, try to focus more on the trends. In the mains examination, if you have to quote, then the numbers become important. Exact percentage, exact number, that becomes important for the mains exam. For the prelims, they will not really ask you about the exact percentage, exact number as such. They will rather ask you about the trends, who's at the highest, who is at the lowest, who is at most risk, etc. The report also talks about how the situation of amphibians has deteriorated since 1980s. There are multiple reasons for that, not just climate change. Apart from climate change, there are other factors as well. Loss of habitat, where they used to live. For example, amphibians, they used to live in water bodies as well. A lot of those water bodies such as ponds and lakes are disappearing. Threats such as diseases, pollution, toxic chemicals in those water bodies, UV radiations, they have also played a role in decreasing the overall population of amphibians. There are other threats such as agriculture, timber, plant harvesting, infrastructure development. For example, if you look at the birds, ask your parents the number of birds that they used to see as compared to number of birds that are usually visible. Now there's a drastic change, because when you cut down so many trees, obviously you're cutting down the homes of these birds, so you're not allowing them to have a settlement anywhere. So places where they used to settle, most of them have been destroyed, and that is why there is a drastic reduction in their population as well. Apart from that, there are other concerns. For example, climate change has been increasing at a very, very fast speed, which is why 39% of the amphibians are facing deterioration since 2004. There have been a lot of threatened species in certain areas, especially India's Western Ghats that used to be the hub of all these amphibian species. There also we have seen negative impact. In Sri Lanka, Madagascar, all of these are seeing problems of climate change, are seeing problems of extinction of amphibians one by one. Now, related to environment, the UN also released multiple reports this year, and I'll be giving you a very brief summary of all of them, just one slide, one page summary. Only the facts that are important for prelims, because as you know, in this series we are not going into detail of these concepts. The idea is just to make you prelims ready. We'll just be focusing on the fact that have a probability of being asked in the prelims. So UN released multiple reports related to environment. In these reports, what do you have to remember? Who published those reports? Are there any important facts or data that you have to remember? First, UN report on interconnected disaster risk report on groundwater extraction. So basically about how much groundwater is being extracted. The report talks about the regions which have seen the maximum depletion of groundwater. Parts of India, northeastern China, western US, Mexico are at the top. Bad news for India. Globally, India pumps the most groundwater mainly for irrigation, domestic and industrial uses. The Indo-Gangetic plains have already passed groundwater depletion tipping point. 78% wells in a state such as Punjab are overexploited because again it's an agricultural mainly state. Agriculture causes 70% of groundwater withdrawals. This is also one of the reasons why the government is trying to push the farmers away from grains such as rice, because it requires a lot of groundwater. We grow rice in excess quantities, we anyways have to export it. The government is pushing farmers away from sugarcane and other crops as well. Second important report, the Adaptation Gap Report of 2023, published by UNEP. What does it say? This report talks about the difference between the money that is required to fight against climate change as compared to money that we have to fight against climate change. So for example, if you require $100 billion to fight against climate change and you only have $80 billion, so there will be a gap of $20 billion. That will be the adaptation gap. The report says that the nation needs $215 billion to $387 billion every single year. Developing countries will require $387 billion every single year in the next decade. At the current level, we are 10 to 18 times shorter than this. So we need 10 to 18 times higher money as compared to the current money that is being donated to these efforts. So there is a big difference in that. There are other reports published by the UNEP also. Do remember these names. UNEP publishes these reports. The UPSC does ask such questions in the prelims examination, where they will give you a name of a report and they will ask you who publishes this or which organization publishes this. Or they might basically give you the match the column form as well, which report is published by which organization. So do remember the UNEP publishes this particular report. Another report by UN was a greenhouse gas bulletin by World Meteorological Organization. It said that the concentration of greenhouse gases that are trapped in Earth's atmosphere were at a record high in 2022. The global average concentration of CO2 was 417.9 parts per million. After CO2, the other two major gases were methane and nitrous oxide. These were the major greenhouse gases that were trapped in the atmosphere, and all of them reached their highest level in 2022. Another report, again by WMO, called the Climate Services Report for 2023. It talked about how many climate change disasters that can be expected in the future. It said by 2030 there will be around 560 medium to large scale disasters every single year. Less than 25% health ministries across the world utilize the climate information that is available to them. Not very important report, just remember the organization that publishes this. This is the World Meteorological Organization that publishes this report. So in all these reports, remember the organization that publishes it and if there is specifically an India related finding in these reports. This brings me to the end of this lecture. We'll continue with environment related news in the next class as well. To download this PDF, join the Telegram channel, do subscribe to this channel and watch out for other initiatives as well. Thank you so much for watching. Jai Hind.